Alright YouTube, today we're working on a new project. We got a 1994 F150. This is a four-wheel drive truck. And we're going to be putting on the Moog CC824 coil springs. These are supposed to level the truck out a little bit. And from reading online, you should be aware that doing any kind of level or lift on these trucks can create alignment issues. For these particular springs, they're designed to work stock with the truck. So worst case scenario is that you would have to buy a special adjustment bushing for your ball joints with these. Anyway, the tools we're going to need to change this out today. We're going to need an 18mm wrench, 1 1/8 wrench. We're going to need deep well sockets in 14mm and 15mm, as well as a regular 13mm socket. I'd recommend that the day before you come out here and spray down all the bolts we're going to talk about taking out with some WD-40 or some other type of penetrating oil. So the first thing to do is get your truck jacked up and get the wheel off, and this is still with weight on the suspension. Then you're going to come up here and take the bolt or the nut off the top of your shock. In order to do that, you'll hold the bottom of right under the top of the shock with the 18mm wrench, and the nut on top should be 15. In my case, that snapped right off. So, moving on from there, we're going to take the bolts out of the back of the caliper. In my case, the brake line's disconnected because I'm also replacing the brake lines on this truck, but another option would be to simply disconnect the brake lines. With those bolts out, you should be able to pull the caliper out. Now, if you're assuming your brake line is still attached, you can set it up here or zip tie it somewhere that's out of the way to keep strain off your brake hose. In my case, I'll just be sitting on the floor. Alright, so the next step is going to be to take a floor jack, and on the support at the back of this arm is where I jack it up to let the weight off of the spring. If you plan to do it, this would be a great time to go ahead and replace your radius arm bushings and axle pivot bushings as well. So I'm going to go ahead, the spring came off of the rest, so I'm going to let it back down just a little bit and loosen the bolt at the top. This is also a 13mm. Set that to the side, and then this hooks in to hold your spring up there. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and jack the truck back up. And the spring is no longer touching the top. So I'm going to come in with the 1 1/8 wrench. This may not be the correct size for this, but it has worked for both sides of mine. I suspect it's actually a similar size in metric. I'll pause for a minute while I get this nut off because it does take a little bit. Alright, we're back, and I got the nut off in the center of the coil spring. To get a little bit better access to it, I went ahead and lowered the truck back down to compress the spring so I could get the wrench in there better. So now we're just jacking it back up a little bit again. All right, so that's enough to get the spring out. Now I've got the washer and the nut that was still sitting down the bottom of the spring. At this point, I'm going to move the jack stand that I have underneath of this axle. Allow it to drop down further than it was. Determine which side of this spring is the top and set it over on here. You're going to have to push down on the end of the axle to get it over in there. All right. And from here, it's going to just be a matter of putting it back together and getting it to seat in there a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is very, very slightly lower the jack to try and seat that spring home a little better. Oh, well, first I got to put something under there so that it's actually supported on something to keep it from just dropping down further. That should do the job. All right, and now we're going to put the washer back in the spring. We'll install our bolt at the bottom with the 1 1/8 again. Put this little bracket in the top. The best bet with the new springs installed is to go in from the hole in the top and bring it around front and put it back in there. And I let it down a little bit too far for this. You'll need to line up your shock absorber as it goes back in as well. And then from there, you'll just be putting the 2 bolts back in your brake caliper and putting the wheel back on. And you should be good to go, other than very obviously needing an alignment. It's a pretty clear difference. I've already done the other side, so I can see that it is noticeably out the way it sits before versus now. So it's definitely going to be a priority to get an alignment done as soon as possible once you perform this work. All right, y'all have a good one.